one of the things that I love about poetry is that I feel like every line is so purposeful and every line is a revelation, right? And I want my prose to function in that way, which, I guess that's not the best strategy when you want to reach the widest audience.
Would disagree. National Book Awards and Oprah, I think the wider public has, I think they're perfectly fine with.
I don't know. I mean, some people, sometimes I think, I don't know, I feel like I run into both types of readers, right? I feel like I encounter both types of readers. Like I encounter readers who say the only thing that they want to read is work like that challenges them and work that requires them to work, right? And to, decipher what is going on the page and to engage with it and wrestle with it. And then I also run into plenty of other types of readers. I feel like especially with my most recent book with Let Us Descend, where people feel like reality now is so difficult and that life now is so difficult. And so they don't want to do more work on the page. They'd rather read something that, where the prose is not difficult, where the prose is straightforward and streamlined and very clean and, and where the subject matter, I guess, is a little less difficult than the subject matter in a lot of my work.
I've been thinking a lot about that. Obviously, Let Us Descend is about enslavement. How the Word is Passed is nonfiction, a book about enslavement. But I've been thinking a lot about a sort of similar thing where people, a lot of our folks, right, like Black folks, feel tired and weary and as you said, there's so much violence that we are proximate to, that we bear witness to, that we have to engage with.
Right.
And the idea of, on our own time, our free time, more deeply engaging with those stories, and specifically in the context of enslavement. I am sympathetic to the argument or the idea that people are like, I'm not going to watch that movie.
Right.
I'm not going to pick up that book.
Right.
I get it. And I also think it's incumbent upon us not to turn away from it. Right. And that is the sort of, that's the balance that we're always trying to find. I mean, it's the balance that I try to figure out with my own kids. Right. Like, we got the books about, the little kids' book about Harriet Tubman, Douglass, and Ida B. Wells, Scott King. And we have the books about the little black girl who wants to be a robot. Right. The little black boy who wants to be a scientist. Right. A black child who wants to grow up and be a bottle cat or a Pokemon. And I feel like you have to have all of it. Right. Because I want my kids to understand, as black children in this country, to understand the lineage from which they come. I want them to understand that they come from a history that is saturated with violence, with oppression, with enslavement, with segregation, because I think you have to understand that to understand the contemporary landscape of inequality, to understand who you are in relationship to your own life, your country, your history. But I also don't want them to feel like that is what their lives or their histories are singularly defined by, right? Like, this is a part of it, and it's a big part of it, but it's not all of it. And your future is not dictated by that history. It's dictated by the sort of contours of your imagination. And so, I think about that in the context of my kids. I think about that in the context of the wider public. Like, I definitely have friends who are like, no, I'm not going to, like, watch that movie. I'm going to watch Love is Blind. I'm not going to watch. And I just think that there's room for all of it. And there has to be. Because if we don't engage with it at all, then I think we fall back into a trap that we were in, I think, certainly in my childhood, in which these conversations were not present at all in our schools, in our public discourse. And as a result, I grew up with a distorted, incomplete sense of what this country was, who I was in relationship to this country. So it's this sort of like, what is the balance and how do you figure it out?
I think that idea of balance is really important. And I know that it's something that I strive for in my life, and then also with my children too, because we've started having, those difficult conversations because they're asking me, things about race or I don't know, they come up with, they have access to the internet, right? And so they're coming to me asking me questions about, life, and I'm trying to explain as best as I can, while I have their attention. But I think, it's one of the things that I usually say whenever someone asks me that question, like about because I guess Salvage the Bones has been on some banned books lists, and so that's something that people ask me about sometimes, and so one of the things that I always say is that I wish that I had had access to more books that would have provided me with the keys to better understand the life that I was living, right? To better understand, the fact that, that generations of my family had lived in poverty, right? And to understand perhaps why that was the case. To better understand why, the education at my public elementary school that I went to, why it wasn't that great, why we lacked certain resources, to better understand, why kids in my, in the high school that I went to when I switched to this private high school would say things like, they would say, oh, the only reason that you're getting this and this and this is because of affirmative action, right? Or or they would, I don't know, they would say that that the playing field was level and, and we were all capable of the same things as if we all had the same resources, right?
Work hard,
right. Right. And so I, of course, was not taught any of, I wasn't taught any of it, right? Like in school, and didn't really have access to it outside of school because I was depending on my school libraries, and they didn't carry the books that I needed necessarily in order to better understand the context of my, the different circumstances of my life. So I don't know. That's one reason that I think fight for Salvage the Bones, fight for Singing Bird Sing, and, fight for Let Us Descend, fight it as in trying to get it out to as many people as I can, and especially get it into the hands of young people who I think, probably rightly so at first, are resistant to it, right? But I don't know. I want to provide them with those keys. I want them to have a different understanding of who they are and of how they and the people that they love, why they live in the communities that they live in. And I feel like that's one of the things that we do in our work,